I'd just like to begin with a word of gratitude for those who brought us together in such a wonderful, a small community to be together for several days. And for all those that arranged it, for Rick and Mary Evelyn and the secretaries. Also for those who have spoken, for John Cobb, whose work has been so important in the thought of many of us, and David Orr, and please forgive me for my lack of memory of names, Inez and Mary, and it was Mary Evelyn and all of you, and the students who were so gracious as to come and be with us. I'd like to begin this evening with just a comment about the North American continent. We live on such a beautiful continent. When we think of the different components of the continent, the Appalachian Mountains, and we're here somewhat in the foothills of the Appalachians. I was born in the foothills of the southern Appalachians and grew up there. And that part of North Carolina, the western part, has more botanical species, they say, or did have more than all of Europe. We think of the northeast, of the maple trees and the oaks and the remarkable colors that are there in the fall, where people go as a kind of a pilgrimage to experience something truly beautiful, something that brings a healing to our human life, along with a sense that, however the universe be explained, is something fantastically beautiful at work. We think of the Great Lakes, we think of the Great Central Valley, of the Rocky Mountains of the Southwest, all of this, the boreal forest of the north, and all of that. It's such a wonderful continent. And particularly it was at something of its height when the Europeans came here. It was discovered by the Europeans, that is, the European phase of the discovery of the continent, some say 5 centuries ago. And it began a new phase in the life of this continent. I once ventured the remark that the Europeans were not very kind to this continent, and that when that first mast appeared from the distant Atlantic, every living being on the North American continent might have shuddered at what awaited it. And so rather, that's the pathos of our lives. It is the pathos of the issue that we're dealing with these days. Because the people who came here from Europe had no sense of joining the North American community. was a community of life here. It was a community of the vegetation, of the trees, and the flowering meadows of the plains, and a great long litany could be recited of the butterfly and the buffalo, the passenger pigeon, of so many wonderful and beautiful and gorgeous realities, divine realities, we might say, and a wonderful people who had an appreciation of this and a certain mystique. A mystique of wonder and communion with this grandeur. But the Europeans that came here, ourselves, I'm going into this question, it's almost more than I really like to, but I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary that we be aware of the forces that have caused us to devastate this continent. And the deepest forces, because if we do not exercise this demonic pathology of the Western soul, then there's no way in which we are truly going to deal effectively with the issue that is before us. Because it's infinitely more than recycling and all that. We must do the 10,000 things. We must put courses in. We must find ways of remedying the damage we've done and so forth. But none of that is going to be effective at the order of magnitude of the issue that we have to deal with. Unless we undergo a healing in the total structure of our being. Because this devastation that we've wrought on this continent did not simply happen out of the industrial age. It did not happen simply out of something that has happened in post-Cartesian times, or simply out of the commercial spirit of the 19th, 20th century. All those are at work. But we have to explain those. Where did they come from? And we have to go back into the very structure of our Western civilization. And a part of my proposal is that this injury that we are inflicting on this continent has its roots in the deepest realm of Western civilization, in the religion, in the humanism of the classical age, in the entire development of the European world over the centuries. There is a kind of a deficiency. I would not say that it was necessarily a consequence, but somehow our Western civilization and our culture was not safeguarded somehow to keep us from doing the things that we've done. It did not mandate it, but it did not prevent us from falling prey to a deep cultural pathology. I would like tonight us to say something about the deep cultural pathology that we have to deal with in our society, and which is at work in the four great establishments that determine our lives: the economic establishment, the corporation, the religious establishment, the church, the intellectual establishment, the university, and the political establishment, the government. All four of these, I suggest, have failed in their capacity to guide and sustain us in a proper way because they're all affected by the great flaw or the great pathology of the West, which is to establish a discontinuity between the non-human and the human. That, I would say, is the central fact of Western civilization and the deepest source of the difficulties that we're dealing with. The discontinuity between the non-human and the human, and giving all the basic rights to the human and all the basic values to the human with no rights or ultimate values to the non-human. And in this situation, the non-human has been vulnerable to the exploitation of the human in many different ways. We exploit the non-human economically, we exploit it recreationally, we exploit it spiritually, whatever. But beginning with with our difficulty or this discontinuity in the religious order, that was manifest at a very early time by the exaltation of verbal revelation above the revelation of the natural world. Treating verbal revelation as though that could be primary revelation, whereas we must say that verbal revelation could never be primary, because verbal revelation requires that a divine communication pass through all the frailties and inadequacies and difficulties of human language. It is affected and determined largely by social structures and by historical events in such a way that to understand it is a great difficulty. And Western theology has always been limited by the fact that it must rest its reasoning primarily on a written scripture. It can bring the revelation of the natural world into interpretation of this, but basically it is dependent on a written scripture, or verbal scripture, not written originally, but verbal. So that's just one of the things I'd say about this inability to deal adequately with the natural world. The same a person might say legally. In this country, as long as our Constitution is our ultimate norm of reference for what can be done and what cannot be done as regards the dealing with the natural world, I would say that the ecology movement cannot be effective because we live under a constitution that guarantees life, liberty, pursuit of happiness to humans, with no recognition of rights to the non-human. And essentially it grants humans the rights to fulfill its destiny at the expense of the rest of the order of the continent. So a person might say that we could go through the other things also. So in the humanistic tradition, our humanistic frame of reference is concerned with human grandeur and human glory. That's why Socrates, on one of the dialogues that Plato wrote, he has Socrates going out and walking out with some companions and discussing things, and Socrates says that he much prefers the city to the country because he can learn in the city from people. He can't learn anything in the country. And he can't learn anything from trees. Rather a striking thing. That's the point. That the trees are really our best teachers. So with the university, the difficulty with the university is it doesn't have a universe. The whole conception of the university as being the gathering place of knowledge of its different modes of expression, I think is totally inadequate. The primary university, I would suggest, is the universe. The universe is the primary teacher. The universe is primary in everything. That's the basic point. The universe is the only mode of being in the phenomenal order that is self-referent. The universe is self-referent. The universe is a text without context. Everything else is a text in the universe context. So that the universe is primary no matter what, economically. And as regards the experience of the universe had by humans, the universe in its expression on the planet Earth is the source and is normative for every aspect of human life. For instance, economics. It's the only source of the basic law of economics has to be to preserve the integral economy of the planet. Because you cannot have a rising human economy with a declining earth economy. You cannot have, in medicine, you cannot have healthy humans on a sick planet. And so with religion, the planet Earth and the natural world is the primary source of religion. From the beauty and grandeur and awesomeness of the natural world, we come to a sense of wonder and at what possibly could account for this, and so we get a sense of the sacred, of the wonder and the mystery of things. And in dealing with this, we recognize that this is a reality that has to be dealt with a certain sensitivity. So with the universe and the university. The universe, as the university, expresses itself throughout the entire natural world, and it's something that we should think about. For myself, I would make this remark. When I think about what has happened in this century, and I belong to the generation that has lived through most of this century, we have done by far the greatest amount of damage that any generation ever did, and particularly the American generation to which I belong. And I ask myself, how did it happen? We're even told by people like E.O. Wilson and Peter Raven and Norman Mars that nothing of this order of magnitude of devastation of the planet Earth has happened since the end of the Mesozoic, some 65 million years ago. That this is not simply another historical change in the human order or a cultural modification. This is changing the chemistry of the planet. This is changing the biosystem of the planet. This is changing the geology of the planet in this awesome order of magnitude. And I ask myself, how could it happen? And my answer that seems to be indicated is that my generation was an autistic generation. My generation showed all toward the natural world, showed all the signs that an autistic child shows as regards the outer world. One of the things that it's that lack of communication, that lack of ability to give or receive affection, that lack of ability of sensitivity. Autistic children sometimes cannot even speak. They cannot even bounce a ball to another person. They're locked into themselves. And I think that my generation has been toward the natural world with all its wonderful qualities. My generation has done wonderful things. And it has been a very devoted generation in the human order. It has had its limitations and all of that. But, and there are magnificent things to be said about the people of the 20th century. But the good intentions is what has caused the difficulty. I frequently say I prefer bad people to good people, because good people with the wrong idea of what's good, the better they are, the worse the consequences. It's the people that are determined to make things better, but don't have a good idea of how you go about that, then they are the people that do the real damage. Now, my generation, I consider to be that we had to be insensitive to ruin the forest, to ruin the rivers, to put 50,000 dams on the rivers of this continent, to read the story of the Western rivers and what happened to these rivers in the 1920s and 30s is something amazing. How we would dare do this to these splendid wonders of the rivers. How we would dare to defile the mountains so terribly. How we would dare cut the great forest that we should have, and I think we do have. As soon as we see these, we have a certain wonder, a certain veneration, a certain awesome quality. And it must take a lot of deadening of our inner world in order to cut these down, in order to leave these clear-cut hillsides or mountainsides. And those of you that have seen that book called Clear Cut by David Brower would know what I mean. To have lost esteem for the natural world on such a scale. To have, and a person could go through a lot of things of that nature, but it was apparently, and a person has to wonder how much of it people must have thought that they were doing some good somewhere, somehow creating jobs, although there's a terrible pathology in justifying this to make jobs. I just can't imagine a more miserable pathology than to make jobs, ruining the whole natural world that supports us, that feeds us. But here's the point, though. What is amazing is a lack of awareness that when we lose the great forest, when we lose the birds, when we lose the butterflies, we don't just lose an economic reality. We lose our souls. Literally, we lose our souls. When our children can no longer see the stars in the sky, it's a soul loss. It's not just a pollution of the air. It's not just a physical difficulty that we impose on ourselves. It's a loss of something in the imagination. It's a loss of understanding. It's ultimately, it's a loss of a sense of beauty and of what life is for. Life, we live for this inner beauty together with the outer world of beautiful. If we destroy the beauty of the outer world, our possibilities of true inner beauty is correspondingly devastated. A person can go into all kinds of inner spiritual processes, but it will never replace the need for this outer world. That's what it was for. That's why humans are brought into being. It's why at a certain stage the universe, in particular planet Earth, required humans to fulfill the order of the development. The universe needed to reflect on and celebrate itself, so it created humans in order to fulfill that, to create a way in which it would celebrate itself. We are that being in whom the universe reflects on and celebrates itself in a special mode of conscious self-awareness. So that this relationship, this inability to recognize that there are not two societies, the human and the non-human, there is only one society. The universe is inevitably and absolutely one. It is bound together in an absolute way, and nothing can ever be taken away from anything else. Nothing can ever be separated from anything else. We can, in this sense, and when we do have the capacity to isolate ourselves by an active mind, but in reality, there's no way in which anything can be exist without everything else and be what it is. Everything is what it is because everything else is what they are. And this is one process. It's not two processes. Here I would just like to mention something that event in my own life, one of the events that to me is one of the most precious moments of my life. I've met with indigenous peoples a number of times, and and frequently been invited to speak with them in some of their meetings. And I was invited by some of the Ojibwe, the Six Nation people, and the Cree at Georgian Bay. They had an assembly. And I didn't quite know what was expected of me. And anyway, when I spoke, I went to the big tent where everybody was, and I said I didn't know exactly what I was expected to say or deal with. So last night, I looked out on the reflection of the moon on the waters, and I asked the moon, what should I say? And the moon said, tell them the story. And I asked the wind, what should I say? And the wind said, tell them the story. And on my way in, I asked the clover in the field, what should I say? And the clover said, tell them the story. My story, the mountain story, the story of the stars, your story, their story, the great story. Because there's only the one story. And then I said, what I say here is not important. But what the stars say is important. And what the wind says is important. And what the mountains say is important. I say, my generation had no sense of how to listen to the mountains. We came here, we couldn't hear what the trees were saying. We had no idea that was the way in which humans become human. And if we don't do that we become inhuman. And so that this difficulty that we're having, you're having, and all of us are having, comes from our inability to tell the story. I said, we have a way of telling the story that we have never quite assimilated. Because one of the things that is so important about the civilization of the Euro-Americans is that the empirical observation of things, and we have looked at the stars, and we've looked at the universe, and we have discovered a wonderful story of the universe. We've discovered the universe, although it moves in ever-renewing seasonal cycles as its basic movement, it's also developed over a long, long time. And it has gone through wondrous stages. And it is a most wonderful story about how things came to be as they are, and the human role in the story. And then I went on to, I've forgotten all that it led to, but the point of telling this evening is that this approach, this sensitivity, and afterwards it was one of the great moments in my life when one of the elders, when Tom Porter was a Mohawk, when he spoke and mentioned that he had not heard a non-Indian speak so much like his grandfather and some of the older people. But this, and even addressed me as grandfather. That's one of the high moments of my life, is to have had that rapport with a people that that if we paid attention to them, could have saved us. But here's another point about the Euro-Americans. We came here, we didn't think the North American continent had anything to teach us. We knew everything. The Bible